what we want to do in our class is basically we want to consider Abram and Sarah. We're not so much looking at the promises, but we'll touch on those promises. We're really looking at what underlies them and the outworking of them. So that's really what the classes are about. And the thing is, when you come to the Abrahamic covenant, of course, it's as simple as the promises of Abraham are very simple to understand initially, because that's what we teach our interested friends so they can be baptised. Because it's the vehicle in which, after the transgression, that God is going to fill the earth with his glory, there's a huge depth in them as well. So there's both those aspects. So in our classes, what we want to do in our class tonight is we want to consider faith demonstrated. We're going to take some divine advice out of Isaiah 51, and we're going to look to Abram, our father. In our second class, we want to look at the testing of an immature faith. We want to go from Bethel to Bethel and how they went down and sojourned in Egypt and returned. Now, in our class, we want to consider faith, how it was nurtured in Sarah's life, and we want to consider the comforting of Sarah. And then in our last class, we want to look at the perfecting of faith, and we want to look at the offering of Isaac. So what we want to cover tonight and look at tonight is we want to look at faith demonstrated, and we want to look to Abram, our father. And so to do that, we're just going to first of all have an introduction and look at perhaps the importance and the extent of the Abrahamic covenant, just to get us an idea of what we're looking at and dealing with. Then we'll look at the fact that Abram's our father, and therefore, if Abram's our father, what makes us his children? Because you ask a brother or a sister that question, I'll give you a quote from Galatians, but they don't, not necessarily, that's true in itself, but there's something already underlying that quote. Then we'll look at how God says, I called him alone. We'll look at, therefore, at the foundation of his faith, where it came from. Then we'll look at, I blessed him, and we want to look at the consequences that faith brings into our lives. And then we want to, if we get there, we want to look at how God says, I increased him. And we want to consider, we want to be able to, by looking at that incident, look at the extent of his faith, which is not based in Genesis 22, as we perhaps might have thought that Paul would have used that when he's expounding Abram's life, proving justification by faith in Romans. You thought he might have used the offering of Isaac, but he doesn't. He uses Genesis chapter 17. So, the importance and the extent of the Abrahamic covenant, we just want to do that to start with, and just go, okay, we all go, well, we know the promises to Abram, but what's we just want to look at the extent of that, of the Abrahamic covenant, how it fits into the Word, and of course we know it's an outline of the gospel. That's the first thing, but the way it sits in the record is it's really sitting there, and that's what the first thing we want to prove, is that it's sitting there to reverse the effects of the Tower of Babel. Okay, so that's in the fact that when that incident occurred, the nations were divided and scattered across the face of the earth. And then the next thing is God introduces a new beginning, and that new beginning is going to continue until the whole earth is just filled with one family. And there's only one mother and father in the sense of that family. And that whole family is only going to be motivated by one thing, and that's what God has promised. And so the Abrahamic covenant runs from the time of the Tower of Babel to the end of the millennial age, 5,000 years. And so if we go back, and we'll just see that how the language is built. So you go back to the Tower of Babel, of course, the incident when men want to establish a name in the earth. And in Genesis 10 it says, talking about the isles of the nations, these were divided, and here's the words, in their lands, after their language, and after their families, in their nations. So you've got this division of the nations by their tongue, by their families and their nations. They are the words that are used in Genesis chapter 10. But of course, when we come to Genesis chapter 12, it says, in thee all families of the earth are now going to be blessed. And when we come to Genesis 22 verse 18, it says, in your seed all nations shall be blessed. So there's the two words, family and nations. And then Paul picks that up in Galatians 3, and we know the quote, the scripture showing that the good news was preached to Abraham, in thee shall all nations be blessed. So you see, it's sitting there as a new beginning to answer the issue that the Tower of Babel brought into the earth. And that's easy enough to see, because when we go perhaps to Revelation 5, and you've got the vision there of the throne established, and if we know Revelation 5, and you've got the 4 and 20 elders sitting around the throne of the Lamb and so forth, and the 4 living creatures, and you've got that vision of rulership, and it says, in the 24 elders are singing that song. They sang a new song saying, thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for you were slain and you've redeemed us to God by your blood, and we're out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. This is the first fruits. And you've made us kings and priests. So you see, there's the first fruits and the reversal of this division that occurred and the scattering of the nations. And you say, oh yes, there's the language of Genesis, but you see it says, you've made us kings and priests. Genesis chapter 17 verse 6. I will make you, God speak to Abraham, I'm going to make you exceeding fruitful. I'm going to make nations out of you, and kings shall come out of you. There they are. And Sarah, yea, I will bless her. She will be a mother of nations, and kings of people shall be of her. There it is, right there. The outworking of the Abrahamic covenant and the first fruits that those who are ruling with Christ at his return. And then if we go right through and we went to Revelation 21, and at the end of the millennial age, and it says that I saw a new heaven or a new earth, the former heaven and the former earth had passed away. There was no more sea. There were no more nations. Because here it comes the complete fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. It means in their midst, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and he will be their God. We know the phrase that he will be all in all. But those last few words there, and I will be their God, taken straight out of Genesis 17. I will establish my covenant with you to be a God unto you, and your seed I will be their God. So you see, if we went and asked, there's the 24 elders, and that's where we hope to be in the future, and we went and asked them, we said, well, who's your father? They say, well, Abraham is. And who's your mother? Well, Sarah. You go right to the end of the millennial age and you can ask any individual there, who's your father? Well, Abraham is. And who's your mother? Well, Sarah's. There's only one family on the earth now. And yes, of course, there are those who came before Abraham, but this is how the word defines it, you see, and they're all Abraham's seed. And that's the importance, of the Abrahamic covenant. And you see, all those individuals, and the thing is, all those individuals, these classes bring out some classes that I was asked to do in our home ecclesia last year and says, "Oh, look at can you just do some classes on the development of Abraham's faith?" And I thought, "Oh, yeah, okay." But when I went back and went through these chapters again, it becomes really crystal clear in your own mind that all these individuals are motivated by just one thing and one thing alone in their lives, and that is what God has promised to them, and they believe that He will do it. As simple as that. And that's that is the motivating power in those individuals, and that's in our lives. When we get up in the morning and we ask ourselves what's going to motivate us as we go throughout the day, and it has to be our faith in what God has promised. And that's one of the things that becomes really clear to you when you go back and look at the subject and in some detail. And some of the things we're talking about are obvious, and that, but it's refreshing to take your mind back and consider what our foundations are. So, just in our own lives, just to ask yourself the question, what does Abram mean to you? And what does Sarah mean to you? Do they mean anything in your life? You know what I mean? Like, this is something I had to think about for myself. Because the Bible just says, well, Abram's your father. We'll see it in a moment. What does that mean? That's something else you learn, and that is that you learn that there's lots of facts and lots of things, but those things that we have always have implications. What does that imply? And that's when you start thinking about those things and the Abrahamic covenant. I mean, every Sunday morning we'll hear these words. Often we'll hear these words, and he took the cup and he gave thanks, and he gave it to them, saying, "Look, you all drink of this. This is the blood of the new covenant, shed for many for the remission of sins." Here's the Abrahamic covenant ratified in the offering of the Son of God. And one of the major differences, and this is in my notes here, but one of the major differences you come to understand is that the Abrahamic covenant is a personal covenant to individuals. My covenants with you. God had to tell Abram over and over again. Whereas the Mosaic covenant is a national covenant. It's given to the nation. And if you were born in that nation, you came under it. But the Abrahamic covenant comes by invitation. So there's a couple of things. So let's just come to our reading for a moment, because this is just where we want to launch into the structure of our class tonight. So in Isaiah 51, and so here we've got what we would call some divine advice. So there, and you see that word hearken, and we read to verse 8, there's hearken there in verse 1, and there's hearken in verse 4, and there's hearken again in verse 7, and it's just there. And it just means listen. It's a command. Look, listen. And then it just says, there's two other, just in this first little section here, there's two other things, two other imperatives, and that's look. So he's talking to some individuals here, and they're described, and there's two qualities here. Are you, and it's not in there yet, but are you pursuing righteousness? And are you seeking my face? You see? And how would you answer that question? The word to pursue is used the Egyptians pursuing Israel. It's used of the avenger of blood pursuing the manslayer to pursue righteousness. But so you ask yourself the question: you just ask yourself that question: am I pursuing righteousness in my life? You're going to answer the question. Because if we answer the question with yes, it means that you haven't. That if we answer the question yes, well, it means we haven't attained righteousness. We're still pursuing it. And that's what it means. So that's why God says, well, look, you've got to look to your father Abram. And if you're pursuing righteousness, look to your father Abram and look unto Sarah that bare you. And I called him alone. And these are the things we just want to look at in our class tonight. I called him alone, I blessed him and I increased him. You see, that's Abram. But you see it says Yahweh will comfort Zion. It's Sarah. I'm going to comfort all the waste places. You think of her, Sarah's boundless. I will make her wilderness like Eden. The desert's going to be like the garden of Yahweh. And you think of the tent when Isaac was born. There's going to be joy and gladness in this tent. Thanksgiving in the voice and melody. Imagine Sarah's tent. She's holding Isaac. God says, if you're pursuing righteousness, you have to look to your father and mother. And that's what we want to do tonight. Just look there and see, well, okay, what does that mean? So, we won't look it up because, but when we come to Romans chapter 4, so we want to like the chapters, Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, Romans chapter 4, the story of Abram but in Romans chapter 4, what Paul does is, in Romans, he's talking about justification by faith. He's talking about those that are looking upon the mercy seat and they're going to be justified because of their faith in that offering. He says, well, who are we going to turn to as a case example of being justified by faith? Well, obviously, we're going to have we'll turn to Abram because he's the father of the faithful. He'd be the obvious one to turn to illustrate this. And that's what Romans chapter 4, where it sits in Paul's argument in Romans, or as he sets out the righteousness of God as it pertains to the individual. But when you come to Romans chapter 4, it just says 7 times, Abram's our father. Like, well, what about Abram our father? What did he find in his life? And then it talks about the fact that he's the father of all those that believe. He's the father of circumcision to those who are uncircumcised. He's the father of those who walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abram. He's the father of us all. He's the father of many nations. It says that twice. So 7 times in Romans 4, it says Abram's our father. So when I was coming back and I was, thinking about all this and thinking about that, you start to understand, Abram's my father. It might be the case, but it becomes a conscious thing. And even in the parable, like Lazarus Jesus puts him in the bosom of Abram. And there he is. And so you see, Abram's our father. So therefore, if Abram's our father, what makes us the seed of Abram? And I just want to take just 3 things out of that chapter, just as an illustration of that. And it's just a development of idea. But you see, he's the father of all that believe. That means to have faith. Now, I'll just tell you something I think, brothers and sisters, and that is like, we often think that knowledge is faith. Knowledge isn't faith. The ecclesia has never had so much knowledge before. We've got knowledge. We've got so much knowledge. You know, you can go and get tapes on this, tapes on that, and you do. Knowledge isn't faith. You see, but you can't have faith without it. So you see, he's the father of all those that believe. That's a what you could call it a mental disposition. It's a belief in trust in God. That's what faith is. And so it's a mental disposition. It's a way of thinking. But he's also the father of those who walk in the steps of that faith, which Abraham, our father, had before he was circumcised. They're walking in the steps of that faith. So that's mental disposition, this belief and trust in Yahweh, leads to a way of life. It has a moral outworking. They're walking in the steps of their father. And then in verse 16 it says, those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. And what Paul's talking about in Romans 4 there is the absolute certainty of future inheritance for the seed of Abram. Absolute certainty of it, because it's going to be given to the seed of Abram by promise. So it's secure. And he argues about that it can't be received by law. So that's just there in Romans 4. But you see what it is. It's a way of thinking and belief which leads to a way of life which leads to the absolute certainty of eternal inheritance. So, Paul says in Galatians, don't you know that they which are of faith, these are the children of Abram? And so it's a family characteristic. And we're hewn from rock. You know, you look to the rock from which you've been hewn. You've been hewn from a rock, something that's constant and that, you know, and the thing is, you know, brothers and sisters, like, that's what I want you to say. You tell me in your life that the very reason why you're here tonight is because of your faith. What you believe, that's driving your life forward. It's absolutely important. You know, like, you see, brothers and sisters, it's not what we're doing that's important. It's why we're doing what we're doing. That's more important. It's important what we're doing, but it's absolutely more important why we're doing what we're doing. And so this unique family characteristic of a sip of water. It all makes me nervous. I'd have a sip of water. No, I can relax. No, so this is so we come to this idea of family likeness, because the word Abram's seed is taken out of Genesis, and on the third day, you know, the seed yielding herb and tree, it's got fruit in itself and it yields the same. It's Abram's seed. And I just want to illustrate this because it's an easy one. And that just an illustration of family likeness. When I was little, I used to suck two of my fingers, which is different, with this hand, these two fingers, like that. Okay, so that was for me a unique family characteristic. But when Hannah, my youngest daughter, was born, she sucked the same two fingers but upside down in her mouth. Same two fingers. Okay. But when she had her first grandson, just to start with, until he burnt on the kettle, he sucked the same two fingers. It's DNA, but you see, it's Abrahamic faith is a unique family characteristic which is enjoyed by all those who are going to receive an eternal inheritance. That's what it is. And it's so important that Paul just says in Hebrews, if you haven't got faith, it's impossible to please God. It's how essential it is. We can know so much. But if we can't believe what God has promised us, we can't please him. And I won't get through this class now. I'll just illustrate that. I've got another little illustration that happened yesterday. And you think about this in Abram's life. The relationship God had with Abram. A friend of mine, his son rang me. Well, he's not a friend, he's someone I've been acquainted with for ages. His son rang me on Sunday night, said, I've got this issue, I've got a concrete pour, I need a steel post, have you got one? And I said, no, what do you need and that? And so on Monday morning I got up and I went and got the steel post and took it out without doing the pour because I had the time and I could do that. And he was the son of someone who I've known for years. So he texts me back, can I get you some beers or something, it's in the tradesman thing. I said, no, it's, I've known your father for a long time and I'm more than happy to do that. He says, and texts me again tonight, there must be something I can give you. I said, no, and you see, we don't think about the pleasure that the Father has in giving us something for free. His pleasure in doing something when we have a need. We don't often see that side of it. I just had that, and so you see how that idea works for the Father himself as he gives to those in need, and we go, I don't believe you. So, and that's when we come to Sarah's life, because you see, Sarah had a problem in her life, and it was simply doubt. She doubted that God could do that for her until she had to go through a whole process to come to that point where she didn't doubt anymore. So you see, so where does this come from? And this quality, like of it being a rock, unyielding, a rock, an unyielding determination to act in a certain way of manner or of life, or it's enormous strength of purpose, a rock-like quality. It's unchanging. We don't change. We learn. We are fickle when we're perhaps younger. Well, I was, and I still am to a degree. But you settle into this way of thinking and a way of life, and it becomes, at the end of it, just becomes unchanging. You just know what decisions you're going to make. Well, within human weakness. And it endures all things. So what's the origin of that? And that's what God says here. Well, listen, you've got to look to your Father. Now notice this, I called him. You see, I called him. That's where faith comes from. It comes from the call. It's who called him. You see. Now, just come over to Acts chapter 7 for a moment. This is this first phrase. Because Stephen tells us about it, and he tells us something specific about it, and he just leaves an inference in his speech. So you know the speech to Stephen's speech, and he begins it because he's going to talk about the history of the nation. But you see in verse 2, Men and brethren, fathers, hearken. Listen, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abram when he dwelt in Mesopotamia. You see that? Stephen says it was the God of glory that appeared unto him. Okay, we just read it and that. But if you come over to the end of his speech in Acts chapter 7 and we look at verse 55, he says, being full of the Holy Spirit, he looked steadfastly into heaven and he's given a vision. He saw the glory of God and Jesus standing on the right hand of God. So you see, Stephen bookends his speech with the glory of God. It's bookended. The speech begins and ends with the glory of God. And in the middle, of course, there's the call of Moses, the angel in the bush. He's afraid to look upon him. And you see, here's the foundation of Abram's faith. The God of glory appeared unto him. What does the phrase mean? It's taken out of, Stephen just takes that phrase, he takes it out of Psalm 29, and Psalm 29 is a psalm David wrote. And you see, this is what how I picture the scene from that. You read Psalm 29, it's about a massive storm that sweeps down and the thunder, that God's uttering his voice in this thunder and so forth, and it sweeps down and then goes out through Kadesh. But this is what it says there. And you imagine it's the God of glory. So what you imagine, the fact is, there's Abram, and of course there would be the angel standing there next to him. He'd just be flat on the ground. Flat on his face. And that's the same in Genesis chapter 7. He fell on his face. So we're not told that, of course, but you have to take the inference from what Stephen said. The God of glory appeared unto him. And you imagine, what did Stephen see when he's given a vision of God's dwelling place? And Jesus standing at his right hand, what did he see? Well, it was that God that appeared to Abram in the angel, the God of glory. And the psalm says, give unto Yahweh, you sons of power, the Elohim, give to Yahweh glory and strength, because that's where your strength and glory is coming from. And 7 times it talks about the voice of Yahweh in that psalm, and then it says, Yahweh sits upon the flood. And it's the flood of Genesis. He sits as a king forever. He makes a decision about who lives and who doesn't live, and the reasons why as a king. And you see, Abram's flat on the ground. He's prostrate. And I believe, brothers and sisters, when you put the record there and you infer from that, he can't get up. And you see, what you see there is what we could call the confession of certain truths. And that is because that interview there would be so different to before the transgression. That's not how we see Adam and Eve in the garden. So there's a confession of certain truths. That is, that man is mortal and he's rightly mortal. Abram's confessing that by just his position on the ground, and he would be understanding and feeling that that the relationship that man experienced with God after the transgression, he's experiencing that truth. And that confession of the facts means that Abram is in desperate need of help. Not only that, you see, not only that, he understands that Yahweh doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. He would understand that the God who has appeared unto him is dwelling in that angel there. He would have understood that by inference. And so he would have understood the power and the majesty of God and the voice of the great King and his universal dominion. It's all there. And you see, that confession of the facts of our true position before the Creator helps us, therefore, to receive what He has promised. Great and precious promises. And that's what He gives to Abram. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do to you. You know, at the 7 clauses there, there's 7 times in the Psalm it talks about the voice of God. They are different. There's 7 clauses in that initial Genesis 12, and Abram's in every one of them. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great. You're going to be a blessing. I'm going to bless those that bless you. I'm going to curse those that despise you. And in you all nations of the earth are going to be blessed. And the thing is this, brothers and sisters, because this is the same thing in my life, and this is something that I've come to learn, and the thing is, it's not something that, we're all learning all the time. I mean, you're doing this and you're listening to something else and so forth, but you see, that confession of the facts is something that we should do every morning when we rise. We've still got a law of sin in us. That's not been taken away by baptism. And the thing is, I want to say this, brothers and sisters, in a sense, and the problem is because this is how our lives are. The problem is in our lives is often the problem's there. Well, Abram didn't say that, did he? As he's lying on the ground, he didn't say the problem's over there. The problem's here. Here. For all of us. Here. The plague of our own heart, which we can't even plumb the depths of. We're so complex as human beings. But God can. He's the only one that can lift us out of it. We don't even know why we're doing what we're doing half the time. And so you see, it's from that disposition, in that sense, that when the promises, therefore, that God exists, that He is, that's what Paul says in that He is, in that belief that He will provide, because you see, this is something that I came back to the promises of Abraham I've never seen before. They are so highly personal and individual. The way He deals with Abraham and Sarah, He's dealing with an individual. We're all individuals, each one of us. The Abrahamic covenant is about an invitation for individuals to come out of the nations. And then it's that response of Abram, because he was asked to leave. And his response was obedience. You see? And so faith is a confident anticipation. You think of who gave him the promises. Faith is a confident anticipation of things hoped for. It's a full persuasion of things that are yet unseen. But the confidence is not in the individual. The confidence is in the one who has promised that He will do such things. That's where the confidence is. We can't have any confidence in ourselves. And so there was this response. So there's faith. Well, that's faith. Okay, so Abram makes that response. So then the next thing is God says, well, I blessed him. And you see, that's the consequence of faith. We just want to look at this just for a moment now in Abram's life. It's the consequence of that exhibition of faith has a consequence. The result of that, And that result is that Abram was blessed. Now we know the circumstances because it was in Genesis 15, and when he says, Lord Yahweh, what are you going to give me? I've got no offspring. He brings them out and he says, well, your seed's going to be like the stars of heaven. Can you number them? Now I want you to think about that. You see, here was faith. Genesis 12, you see faith beginning. But here when you come to something here about your offspring is going to be like the stars of heaven for multitude, we've never been asked to believe that ourselves, that our offspring is going to be like that. But you see, he has to now believe that in something that is humanly impossible. And it's obvious that he had no understanding of how that was going to be outworked by what they did next. No understanding of how that was going to be or how it could possibly be. No understanding of how that would be outworked, but he believed it. And that's why, and it says there, of course, that God imputed righteousness to him. You see, if you're pursuing righteousness, that's what God's saying. Well, listen, look to your father. Notice what I did. I bestowed it upon him because he believed in me. And that's, we understand that. We're not often very righteous, but because we believe in God, he's prepared to pass over that unrighteousness and call us righteous. And obviously, many times in our life, we're not. It's not our righteousness. It's a bestowed righteousness. And that's what Paul goes on and on and on about in Romans 4. He says he believed on him. This is what's going to happen if you believe on him. You're going to be justified. He says, look, Abram didn't do anything. That's what Paul says in Romans 4. He says, look, Abram didn't do anything. He simply believed. Therefore, it's just a gift. And it's a blessing. He uses the example of David. The blessing of a man whom God forgives sin. That was the opposite. He uses it as an example. Blessed is the man to whom God is not going to impute sin. And he's not going to impute sin for David's case because he confessed it. And he's not going to impute sin to Abram in his circumstance because he believed in him. He didn't believe that he existed. He believed that he would do what he said he would do. Implicitly. When it was impossible humanly for it to even happen. And God says that sort of faith, that sort of belief, has got a consequence, and it's justification. And so, when we come back to Isaiah 51, just come back there a moment, he talks about it. See in Romans verse 5, now notice what it is, because it's important. You see what he says in verse 5? My righteousness is near, and my salvation is gone forth. It's Yahweh's righteousness that's near to the person. So it's so near to them, as Paul says in Romans, because it's only a thought away in their heart. That's how near it is. They believe in me and my salvation. And then in verse 6, you see, my righteousness shall not be abolished. Of course his righteousness won't be abolished. My salvation is forever. Verse 8, my righteousness shall be forever. My salvation shall be from generation to generation on Abram's seed. Those who are like their father Abram. That's the channel of blessing. There's no blessing outside of it. And that section runs right through to Isaiah 54. It involves the sacrifice of the Son of God in Isaiah 53. It's a section in Isaiah, and this is how it concludes in Isaiah 54. This is the heritage of the servants of Yahweh, and their righteousness is of me. And that's a righteousness that comes through faith. Yeah, it's a law. Paul calls it in Romans 3 the law of faith. He calls it the law of the Spirit of life in Romans 8. It's a law. It's as powerful as a law, a physical law. And it's fundamental to the Abrahamic promise. And you it's fundamental to the Abrahamic promise. We won't talk about that there. Now, what time? We started up at 7. I want to do this, brothers and sisters. I want to show you the extent of his faith now for a moment. If we can just get this, just spend just a couple of minutes here. And I want you to put your thinking caps on, because I want you to think hard about this, because I thought about it for weeks. Oh, my head. I thought about it for a long time, and because what you're coming back to is, you see what I said at the start, we understand the promises that are surfacing. So I understand the promises, there's going to be an eternal inheritance. Yeah. And that's enough for us to be baptised. And the Father's happy with that. But as we grow, he wants us to understand what's going on. And I increased him. Now, this is the question, you see. I only had one son. Yes. How do you work that out? And Sarah said, who would have said that I would have given children suck? You only had one son. So you see, I just want to think about this, and so Paul outlines this. So there's faith. We've looked at its foundations. We've looked at it there as justification. Now, when you come to Genesis 17, Paul just says, look, he considered his own body now dead. He uses 5 verbs. He staggered not in unbelief. He was strengthened in faith. He gave glory to God. He fell on his face. His heart was just full. He's glorifying God for it. He can see now how the promise is going to be outworked. He understands it, and he's fully convinced. That's the extent of his faith in Genesis chapter 17. Paul just spells that out for us in the end of Romans 4. And he uses 5 verbs, and we'll come back to it. 3 in the active and 2 in the passive, and we'll want to explain what it is later on. You see, what happens is this. You see, Genesis 15, your seed's going to be like the stars of heaven for multitude. Right? How's that going to be? You've given me no seed. Now listen. The word of Yahweh came to him. You see, there's titles used through his life, and they're all important. The word of Yahweh came to him in a vision. It's going to come forth from your bells. He's told him that. It's not Eliezer. You look to heaven, and if you can number those stars, so shall your seed be. They say you can see 10,000 stars on a clear night, but what it means, it's just going to be an innumerable multitude. But you see, Abram's already been told in Genesis chapter 13, your seed's going to be like the dust of the earth. And because the dust and the stars and the sand all represent different things, because your seed's going to be, they're all going to be sons of men. And I'll be sons of God. They only come from the dust. So when he's told in Genesis 15, your seed's going to be innumerable, of course, that's reiterating Genesis chapter 13, but it's something else there. And you see, he used the title Lord Yahweh. We know that means he who will be lords. And the word of Yahweh came to him. And so you know the phrase in Psalm 33, by the word of Yahweh were the heavens made, and all their host, by the breath of his mouth. That's how they were made. Isaiah 40, lift up your eyes on high and behold, who's created these? He brings out their host by number. He calls them all by names. By the greatness of his might, he's strong in power. Not one of them is going to fail. That's your seed. So you see, this seed here are going to be lords. They're going to be light bearers. They're going to be rulers in the heavenlies. They're going to be able to divide light from darkness. They're going to be rule over day and night. And they're named and numbered. And when he comes into Genesis 17, he says, they're from the nations. As he shows them in Genesis 17 how this is going to be. Who's created these? And John the Baptist says, look, God can raise up these stones, seed Abram. That's who raises up Abram's seed. God raises up Abram's seed. So when he comes here to this, explaining how this is going to be in Genesis 17, he asks Abram now to walk before his face and to be complete. Now you do that, and I'm going to build my covenant with you. It's personal. Now to walk before God means it's a term that's used for absolute loyalty to a king. And we know who Abram met. And it means to condition your entire range of human experience and awareness of his presence and in response to his demands. In the day, walk before me. And this is then what I'll do. It's conditional. So that's the idea there. And so he's told his seed's going to be like that, like the stars of heaven. Paul in Romans chapter 4 says at that time he's told he's going to be the heir of the world. Now he's not the heir of the world because he been promised an eternal inheritance in the land. He's going to be the heir of the world because all his offspring are going to be the rulers of it. You know, like stars of heaven. And Paul says there that he became heir of the world through the justification, through the righteousness of faith. So you see, what happens is when God comes to him in Genesis chapter 17, which of course is 15 years later or 14 years later, and now he says, well, now I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be outworked. And he falls on his face. And you see what God has had. And this is, I just want to explain this, brothers and sisters, because it took me a long time to see this for myself, but you see it, and it's absolutely clear. See, Sarah was barren. She was barren as soon as she stepped into the record. But Abram wasn't. So that Abram fathered a child and perhaps other children through Keturah. Some people think that happened before the birth of Isaac. So God had to wait and wait and wait until Abram could produce a child out of his own strength, out of the flesh. You see? And so, now here's Abram 100 years old, 99 years old. And you see, he considered God's going to say to him, I'm going to multiply you. You're going to be exceeding fruitful. Nations are going to come out of you. Kings are going to come out of you. He thinks about it. He's 100 years old. His body's dead. As far as producing children go. He considered his own body now dead. And the deadness of Sarah's womb, she had been barren for 60 years. They were producing children in their 30s when they come to the record. She had known, and up there she had been barren for 60 years. He thinks about it. And you see, he staggered not in unbelief. That's what Adam and Eve did. That's what the wilderness generation did. They had an evil heart of unbelief. They couldn't enter in because they could not believe. He staggered not at that. He was strong in faith. He gave glory to God. He was fully convinced. And the thing is, there's the extent of his faith there, because you see, what Genesis 17 is about is this, is that really, even though Abraham produced the child and Sarah produced the child, and we'll see this when we come to Sarah's life, it was Yahweh's child as well. Because all Abraham's seed are begotten of God. It's simple when you see it. And you see, you know, I said to some of the verbs in the active and some in the passive, he considered, he staggered not in unbelief, and he was strong in faith. You know, in the Greek, those verbs in the passive, that means he didn't do it. Do you know what it means? Because God was saying to him, as he lay on his face, I'm building my covenant with you. It's between me and you. This is what I'm going to be doing for you. Sarah's going to bring forth kings. And as God is telling him that and explaining to him what he's doing to him, he's strengthening his faith. See, it's personal. 13 times in that chapter he says, this is what I will do. And you see, that's what circumcision is. That's an aspect of it. You see, circumcision is not just the cutting off of flesh. That happened in the sacrifice of Christ. There, the flesh was cut off there. But circumcision means a whole lot of other things, because you see, he had his name changed. He had, you know, the fifth letter of the alphabet put in his name, and God's giving him this gift. It's all circumcision. Abram's lying on his face, glorifying God. It's a circumcised heart. No confidence in the flesh. That's what Paul says in Philippians. The circumcision, we are the circumcision, we've got no confidence in the flesh. Flesh can't produce anything. It takes so long to see it, brothers and sisters, you know, in my own life. You know, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. You've got to be pleased with me. There's no confidence in the flesh. You come to the Abrahamic covenant and it's God who's doing all the work. You know, my Father worketh hitherto and I work. Oh, what do you mean? And see, that was a sign, you know, this is John Martin, it's a sign of shared fatherhood. You know, like when they held that child, Abraham says, look at him, he's just like me. And Sarah says, look, he's got my features as well. And the name angel that came to Sarah could have been standing there and say, you notice he's got my characteristics as well. You see, brothers and sisters, there's the extent there of his belief and what it brought for him in his life. And that was 24 years of development. That took 24 years. I mean, it was going to be another 33 years after that he would offer Isaac. And the thing is, in our own lives, and I hope that's been helpful, because I found it helpful in my own life, brothers and sisters, to put my trust in God more than what I had before. To trust in Yahweh. I'm not saying I didn't trust in Yahweh before. I just found going back through these promises opened my eyes up more, because that's what I'm saying. What's underlying the promises is so vast and so great. So we look to the quarry from which we've been hewn. We consider the foundation of that faith. We see what the consequences of belief in Yahweh brings. Justification. Yes, it's already in a way of life. And we're justified not because we believe our offspring's numerous. We believe on him who raised up Jesus our Lord from the dead and raised him. That's how we're justified. We believe on him that did that. That's what Paul's saying. Not the act in itself, the one who did that. And the act in itself is important. And I increased him. Only after. And you imagine Abram lying there. He can't produce any child. And Abram gets that straight away. He understands what's happening. He knows now why he's had to wait years and years and years. All this internal waiting and nothing's being fulfilled. And then fruitfulness. And that'll be like our own lives. We'll all be on that we've all believed. We've all been baptised. And we'll be somewhere along there because we are Abram's seed, brothers and sisters. That's what you have to understand in understanding life. Abram is your father. You exercised faith in being baptised. That was the faith of your father. And we'll all be along there somewhere. We might be waiting. Like our lives are, that was 24 years. And so there's some a few thoughts on the importance of faith. And I hope it's been helpful. because I hope it's been helpful because it's really helped me to understand the promises, and I found it helpful in my daily life. And the thing is this, brothers and sisters, because you get up in the morning and you confess the facts. That's called confessing the truth. We get up in the morning and we confess the facts. And then there's room for God to work. If we don't get up in the morning and confess those facts, there's no room for him to do anything in our lives. And that's what Abraham did. You see, faith does that. It steps aside and it lets God have the space, to work. And that's really, really important. But it comes from confessing the facts. And that's two, and I just finished, I've gone too long on that, but I just want to tell you that, you see, there's only two facts. That's man's mortal and rightly so. That's a fact for sure. We all understand it. We've got a law in us that tells us that. When we apply ourselves to the Word of God, we instantly know that that's unrighteous. And the other fact was there, but it wasn't really so much, and that is God's manifestation. There it is right there. You're going to become like this. You're going to be manifesting me. Isn't it? Those are the two facts there when Abram began. Not that was what he was taught at the time, but the other two facts. They were the facts of the life of the Son of God.